You know the feeling, the rush of anxiety when someone invites you out or when a gathering is just around the corner. The thought of mingling, engaging, or even small talk makes you want to retreat to your space. It's not just about avoiding discomfort, it runs deeper than that. Somewhere along the way, the world around you started feeling too loud, too much. Maybe it's because of work, the never-ending demands and that gnawing stress eating away at you every single day. Or perhaps it's the pressure to meet expectations and be the perfect partner, father, or provider. After a while, you stop hearing your thoughts. The idea of social interaction becomes yet another overwhelming task for which you don't have the energy. But here's the hard truth. It's not about just being too busy. It's more than that. It's the fear of judgment, the exhaustion from endless connectivity, the erosion of your connection with others, and the emotional exhaustion that comes from hiding parts of yourself in front of others. Have you ever stopped to wonder why this happens? In today's video, we're diving into why men over 40 often feel disconnected from others and avoid socializing, even when deep down we crave authentic connections. Stick with us, because we're about to uncover some truths you may not have thought about before. If you find this video useful, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell on Stoic Narratives Official for more insights into the world of Stoicism and how it can help rebuild your connection to yourself and others. Number 1. Overwhelm from work and life. Stress, work demands, daily responsibilities, and the constant juggling of personal and professional tasks. These things pile on without you even realizing how much weight you've been carrying. Life doesn't give us much of a break, and over time, this pressure builds up in ways that affect your emotional well-being and your ability to connect with others. Have you ever felt like you can barely get through the day without feeling mentally and physically drained? And when you think about socializing, it feels like just one more burden to carry. A man in his 40s, well established in his career, found himself at a point where the sheer weight of work and life demands led him to isolate himself. Every day he woke up to endless emails, meetings, responsibilities at home, and the stress of managing it all. By the time evening came around, all he wanted was to lock himself away from the world and sit in silence. Socializing was no longer a way to relax, it had become a chore. Why does this happen? In the pursuit of professional success, personal growth, or simply managing family and home life, we can lose touch with our emotional health. For some, the pressure to achieve becomes so overwhelming that the thought of interacting with others only adds to the stress. It becomes less about desiring connection and more about the fear of further depleting what little energy remains. Think about it. When your mind is constantly racing, caught in the loop of professional obligations and personal struggles, can you honestly say that you have enough emotional energy left to devote to friendships or meaningful connections? Every request to hang out, grab a coffee, or attend a social gathering feels like just another task on a never-ending to-do list. As the stress mounts, your mind retreats inward, craving quiet above all else. This is where Stoic philosophy can offer some clarity. Stoics teach us to control what we can and accept what we cannot. The harsh reality is, no one can pour from an empty cup. Your work, responsibilities, and life stresses deplete your emotional reserves, making it difficult, if not impossible, to give back to others in a way that fosters healthy relationships. In these moments, it's not about avoiding connection entirely, but rather understanding that boundaries need to be set for self-preservation. Consider how a person might go through the motions of socializing, but all the while, they're emotionally unavailable because their minds are preoccupied with work or personal issues. His need for alone time increases, not out of disinterest, but because silence is the only reprieve from the constant noise of life. And yet, after a period of isolation, there's often a sense of regret, a feeling of missed opportunities to form deep, meaningful connections with others. It's as if the cycle of stress, isolation, and regret repeats itself, like a continuous loop that keeps dragging you further away from genuine human connection. If you ever found yourself in a situation where you canceled plans with friends or skipped an event because the idea of socializing felt unbearable, you might be experiencing the subtle effects of overwhelm. It's not that you don't care or aren't capable of deep, meaningful relationships, but rather your mental and emotional energy has been sapped by daily pressures. The solution is to understand that acknowledging these limits and protecting your energy is just as important as fulfilling obligations or meeting others' expectations. And here's the tricky part. When you continually push yourself to interact socially despite being worn out, it usually leads to burnout, resentment, or even emotional withdrawal. Sometimes it's not that you don't want to connect, it's that the emotional price of doing so feels too high. Socializing becomes another form of emotional manipulation, draining you in ways you hadn't anticipated. You might even feel resentment toward those around you, not because they did anything wrong, but because the pressure you're facing has created an invisible wall that's hard to break through. Think about your life right now. Is work and stress taking priority? Does the idea of social interaction drain you more than it invigorates you? The Stoic principle of accepting what you cannot change holds in this situation. Sometimes you simply cannot control the stress from work, but you can control how you respond to it. It's okay to pull back when you need it. It's okay to say no to the pressures of endless social interaction if your emotional reserves are running low. So let's reflect. How often do you find yourself overwhelmed, feeling that the weight of work and life is sabotaging your social life? Can you start recognizing the signs early on, adjusting your priorities, and protecting your energy without guilt? By practicing Stoic principles of self-awareness, discipline, and control, you can recalibrate your life and make room for healthier, more meaningful relationships. Relationships that won't just drain you, but instead nurture and rejuvenate. This isn't a call to completely avoid socializing or to cut ties with friends, but a gentle reminder to check in with yourself and ask, are you giving too much to the wrong things and not enough to yourself? Number 2, fear of judgment. It's a familiar feeling, the anxiety that grips you every time you consider stepping into a room full of people. The fear that people will scrutinize your every word, every move. Social settings can become more like minefields where each conversation feels like a test and every misstep feels monumental. As a man in his 40s who's been through various ups and downs, the desire to avoid these interactions becomes almost instinctual. You've had enough of the judgment. It weighs on you, holding you back, not just from the moment, but from future chances of forming genuine connections. Have you ever been at a gathering, everyone around you engaged in conversation, and you're standing there, unsure whether to contribute because you're afraid of how your words will be received? That fear, what if you say the wrong thing? What if they don't think you're cool or smart enough? The longer you stay silent, the more you feel disconnected, as if the people around you are living in a world you're not part of. But the harsh truth is, you don't know if they are silently battling their insecurities too. We all have that voice in our heads, don't we? The one that tells us we don't measure up, that we're not worthy of being in the spotlight. Take, for instance, a man who used to be confident in his younger years. But over time, personal failures and critical comments from others chipped away at his self-esteem. The man found himself avoiding social gatherings. Each invite felt like a potential pitfall where his every move could be judged. Instead of looking forward to the interaction, he'd feel dread creeping in. Even when he did push through, his thoughts would race with anxieties about whether his contributions were valid. The underlying cause of this fear? Judgment. The belief that others will see you as incompetent, boring, or unworthy. It's a fear so real that it keeps you out of places and away from experiences that could enrich your life. The harshest part? This fear often doesn't even have any basis in reality. It's all created in the mind. You can be in a room full of people who are too preoccupied with their own insecurities to care about yours. But in your mind, you're the subject of an unrelenting critique, and that critique keeps you from connecting with others in meaningful ways. We've all been conditioned to value external opinions far too much. But what if the only opinion that truly matters is your own? Stoicism teaches us that our judgment of ourselves should come from within, not from the fleeting judgments of others. The Stoics understood that external approval is fleeting and unreliable. You will not gain anything from pleasing the crowd if you lose sight of yourself. That's the core lesson that can change how you interact in social circles. If you stop judging yourself based on the shifting perspectives of others, you gain the freedom to be yourself, without constant worry about what people think. You see, confidence is not about being perfect or flawless. It's about accepting who you are and trusting that you're enough, just as you are. When you believe that your worth isn't tied to others' validation, the idea of judgment loses its power over you. I know it sounds like a lot to ask. How do you shut off those feelings of self-doubt and fear of judgment? It's not about suppressing them, but acknowledging that the fear is simply a product of your mind, not an inherent truth. It takes practice, but each time you walk into a room and choose not to listen to those critical voices in your head, you're reinforcing your self-assurance. Small steps. Make eye contact with someone new, share an interesting thought in conversation, or express your true opinion, even if it's imperfect. With each action, you tear down a little piece of that wall built by fear of judgment. You know, there's a quiet power in realizing that others are just as imperfect as you are. As they worry about what you think of them, they're not busy analyzing your every word or action. Isn't it freeing to understand that most of the time, people are just thinking about themselves? They have their anxieties and worries, and they're far too preoccupied with their fears to judge yours. It's as if everyone is walking around wearing blinders, focused on their insecurities. So instead of feeling judged, why not consider that everyone is in the same boat? Vulnerability connects people, and by embracing your own, you'll find that social situations become less like tests and more like opportunities to engage with others on a deeper level. Here's a question. When was the last time you let your fear of judgment stop you from doing something that would have been meaningful for you? Have you ever avoided interacting with someone because you convinced yourself that they'd judge you, only to realize much later that nothing of the sort ever happened? So, here's what you can do moving forward. Remember, judgment is often nothing more than a figment of your imagination. When you catch yourself hesitating to engage, pause and ask, are they judging me, or am I just imagining it? In social circles, build your confidence by reminding yourself that your value doesn't depend on how others see you. With this mindset, those same interactions that once felt overwhelming and fearful will become easier, more natural, and maybe even enjoyable. Let me leave you with a question to think about. What would you do if you let go of your fear of judgment and embrace the freedom of being yourself around others? The truth is, as soon as you start to rebuild your confidence, you'll realize that judgment is not nearly as powerful as you thought it was. You'll discover that true connection lies in embracing who you are, without the need for others to approve. Number 3. Digital overload. It's no surprise that many of us, as we get older, feel overwhelmed by the constant barrage of notifications, emails, messages, and social media updates. Being connected 24/7 is more of a curse than a blessing. We've all been there, scrolling through our feeds, checking our inbox for the 100th time that day, feeling as if we can't take a breath without another ping, another alert demanding our attention. Over time, this constant connectivity leads to digital overload, and that's when the line between connection and disconnection starts to blur. Take a man in his 40s, for instance, who spent most of his life adjusting to rapidly changing technology. At first, the constant connection felt like a privilege, a way to stay in touch with friends and business opportunities, a bridge to the world beyond his door. But soon enough, what once seemed like a tool for progress became something else altogether. As the demands of work grew and social media became all-consuming, he realized he couldn't escape from it. His phone buzzed from morning till night, and slowly, conversations that used to happen face-to-face started occurring only through quick texts or posts. Worse yet, it began to feel like he was never really present anymore, either in work or relationships. Have you ever been in the middle of a dinner with friends, only to find that you're all scrolling through your phones, half engaged, missing out on the connection that should have been happening in real time? The distractions that these devices bring aren't just minor annoyances anymore. They've created a serious disconnect between who we are and how we live in the world. We're constantly multitasking between checking our emails, replying to messages, and keeping up with what our distant friends are doing. But is this truly enriching our lives, or is it just piling on more stress? Here's something to think about. If you're constantly plugged in, you're never really disconnected from the chaos. You might think that you're being productive or maintaining your social circle, but in reality, digital overload makes it harder to truly connect with those around you. Your energy is being divided into endless streams of fleeting digital interactions, and the physical world around you becomes background noise to your device-driven life. You may even get to the point where your relationship with people in person starts to feel a little, well, awkward. How long has it been since you've spent uninterrupted time with someone, focusing solely on their words and presence without thinking about how your phone could just vibrate at any moment? The truth is that social media, email, and constant notifications are exhausting. More often than not, they take away from the time and energy you could be investing in more genuine, fulfilling interactions. The worst part? You become disconnected from yourself. Your mind is constantly pinged with thoughts of, did I respond to that? How did that post do? Was my message received? It pulls you away from mindfulness, from focusing on what truly matters in the present moment. You know, there was a time when we could focus on a single task without wondering about 20 other things in the background. But now, the more we connect, the more we find ourselves, ironically, disconnected from the world around us. The Stoic approach gives us an alternative. Be present. Wealth consists not in having great possessions, but in having few wants, said Epictetus, one of the great Stoic philosophers. When we give too much of our attention to every incoming notification and every new post, we allow ourselves to be hijacked by constant wants. Wants for attention, validation, and distraction. The Stoics taught that our true power lies in the ability to focus on what's important in the present, to filter out distractions, and to live mindfully. That constant connectivity not only hinders the depth of relationships, but also the quality of our internal dialogue. Have you ever tried to quiet your mind, only to have it buzz back to life with the thought of a message you forgot to respond to or something you saw online? We become enslaved by the very technology meant to bring us closer. What does your day look like if you choose to unplug just for an hour? No emails, no social media, no calls. It's a powerful experience to regain a sense of calm in the silence of your thoughts and the people physically in front of you. The constant need to be connected drains the energy needed for meaningful connection. It gives you the illusion of socializing while robbing you of true, deep conversations that matter. Now imagine this. You're meeting a friend for coffee. But instead of focusing on their words, you're distracted, checking your phone every few minutes. This person, the one you're meeting, becomes just another backdrop to your digital life. Meanwhile, in the span of a single conversation, you're losing out on the joy that a face-to-face interaction should bring. Isn't it ironic that, in a time when we have more ways to be connected, we often feel more isolated than ever? This digital overload is why we feel drained after spending an hour in a crowded room or a bustling office. The human mind wasn't built to handle constant stimuli. It craves focus, peace, and meaningful interaction. But every time we pick up our phones to scroll through endless streams of content, we're overloading our brain with more than it can process. In an age where we constantly strive for validation online, it's easy to forget that true validation comes from within. What you are to be, you are already. This core Stoic wisdom reminds us that the ultimate approval we seek does not come through likes or shares, but through knowing that we have remained true to ourselves. So, here's a reflective question for you. When was the last time you found yourself sitting quietly, uninterrupted, with your full attention on a conversation with someone who mattered, without any distractions of digital devices tugging at your mind? Think about how that felt. When did you last feel truly connected to another person, body and soul, without any external distractions? In the end, the choice is simple. Are you going to let digital overload rule your interactions, or will you consciously take back control and invest in real, face-to-face moments of connection? If you think that more connections will always lead to greater fulfillment, remember this: more isn't always better. Meaningful is. Number 4. Losing the connection to shared interests. It's not unusual for a person to feel disconnected from others, especially when shared interests start to fade away. After a certain point in life, it may seem like those friendships and relationships that once seemed so fulfilling just don't resonate in the same way. You've been there, hanging out with people, maybe talking about what seemed important at the time, only to find yourself thinking about something else. The excitement has waned, and you're left wondering, when did this lose its spark? There was a time when a group of friends would meet up, and the conversation could flow for hours, seamlessly moving from one topic to another. Each of them shared a passion for something, whether it was the same band, hobby, or even career aspirations, and that shared interest brought them together, creating a bond that felt strong. But over time, a sense of distance began to form, not out of malice, but from the simple, quiet drift of personal evolution. Take him, for example. A man in his 40s, who was once part of a tight-knit group of friends. They had the same interests back in their younger years. They'd spend weekends going to concerts, talking about books, or discussing what their futures might hold. But as the years went by, those shared passions began to lose their grip on them. One by one, people started shifting their focus. Some got deeper into their work. Others grew more involved with their families. Suddenly, the bond they had wasn't quite the same. Conversation dwindled. The once flowing exchange of ideas turned into surface-level talk. It's easy to dismiss this shift as just the passage of time or mere maturity, but that doesn't quite capture the underlying reality. The foundation of their relationship, the thing that held them together, was their shared love for things that no longer resonated with everyone. As their interests diverged, so did the connection. Now imagine this. Each of those people, realizing that they're no longer excited about the same topics, starts to wonder if they have anything in common anymore. This kind of slow unraveling can cause discomfort. The truth is, without that solid connection to shared passions, it's difficult to find common ground. How many times have you gone to an event or gathering and felt out of place because it seemed like everyone else was on the same wavelength, but you weren't? How did we go from talking about everything to just staring at the ceiling, you might wonder? That's a common feeling when life changes and you can no longer connect with others in the way you once did. Without something to focus on together, all that remains is small talk and polite silence. At this stage, it's easy to feel disconnected or even alienated. And isn't that why you don't want to be around people? Not because they're bad people, but because it's difficult to pretend to be interested in a conversation you don't care about. Relationships are like plants. They need nurturing, attention, and sometimes a little bit of sunlight to thrive. When you stop watering them with the things that once fueled them, it's not surprising when they begin to wilt. Take another example. A woman in her 40s attends a gathering, and after a while, she starts to notice that the conversations around her feel hollow. While some of the group members excitedly discuss a new trend or tech development, she finds herself thinking about other things, her family, her health, or simply what she wants to do with her time. She used to have an eager interest in the same subjects, but over the years, those passions shifted. She's not the same person anymore, and so the connection to the others feels fragile. This scenario isn't as unusual as it seems. Life moves us forward, sometimes in ways we don't expect, and as a result, interests and personal growth take us down different paths. The discomfort of losing that shared connection makes the idea of spending time with others less appealing. Why engage with people who don't understand where you're coming from? Why fight to revive a relationship that, at least in the realm of shared interests, feels like it's already over? But here's the catch. Isn't it possible, even in the midst of all this change, to rediscover some common ground, to find a fresh reason to connect with others? You don't have to rebuild everything, but perhaps you could begin by seeing the similarities in what you do share today, rather than what you don't anymore. And let's ask ourselves, have you been too rigid in your approach to others? Could it be that, in a world where passions evolve, finding new ways to meet people halfway is just as valuable as those long-lost common interests? Could we all use a little flexibility in how we view relationships as we grow older? Perhaps the real challenge lies not in holding on to the past, but in acknowledging that evolving and finding new shared interests doesn't signal the end of relationships. It might just mean the start of something new, maybe not like the old days, but just as meaningful in its own right. After all, connections don't always need to remain the same, but they do need to evolve together. Now take a moment. Think about those connections you've left behind. Could you still find something in common, even if it's different from what it once was? When you consider the relationships in your life, do you see them as flexible, able to adapt and thrive? Or have you stopped trying because the original bonds are no longer there? There's always room to rediscover that connection. The question is, are you ready to do so? Number 5. Emotional vulnerability. Sometimes when you think about the discomfort you feel around other people, it's not just because the conversation feels shallow or the interests no longer align. It's because there's a deeper barrier in place. Emotional vulnerability, or rather the avoidance of it, is at the heart of many struggles in building genuine connections with others. As a person matures, perhaps having been through personal hardships, there's a tendency to hold back emotions as a protective measure. The idea of laying oneself bare, showing not just the highlights but also the wounds, becomes unappealing. After all, isn't life about maintaining control? Yet, without emotional vulnerability, true connection with others remains elusive. There was a man who spent years building a well-crafted exterior. Successful at work, seemingly secure in his family life, he had plenty of social encounters, but deep down, he wasn't connecting with anyone. He found it easier to talk about the mundane, politics, the latest game scores, than to touch on anything remotely personal. The last time someone asked how he truly was, he didn't know how to respond. "Fine," he said, as though that simple word could patch up the invisible walls he'd carefully constructed over time. Fine worked until it didn't. He got home that evening, realizing that his interactions felt more like transactions than relationships. Sure, he had people to share a beer with, but no one to share a fear or a regret. Is that really what you want from your connections, though? What's the point of a friendship or a relationship that never allows room for vulnerability? Without it, it's almost like a disservice to the soul, living but never fully alive with others. If you can't open up to someone else about who you are, then how will they ever get to know the real you? So why avoid showing your true emotions? In a world that often praises strength and stoicism, it may seem like exposing yourself to others emotionally is akin to a weakness. Being vulnerable might seem risky, as if others will take advantage of you. Yet, true vulnerability, genuine emotional openness, is a strength, the kind that leads to stronger, deeper connections. Without that willingness to show your real emotions, you risk living a life surrounded by people, but not truly seen by anyone. Have you ever been in a room full of people, yet felt utterly alone? You can say fine, you can smile, you can talk about the weather or the latest fad, but none of it matters unless you can dive into the emotional depth of what it means to truly connect. Without emotional vulnerability, these surface-level interactions feel hollow, don't they? And don't we all crave deeper, more meaningful human connection? Another woman used to be uncomfortable letting anyone in on her real feelings. She was great at playing the role of a strong friend, a loving spouse, and a dependable coworker. But one evening, after her father fell ill, she had an emotional breakthrough. While others were talking about their days and their personal stories, she found herself in the middle of a conversation, spilling truths she had never spoken aloud before. The floodgates opened, and much to her surprise, her friends weren't repelled. Instead, they welcomed her with open arms, offering support in ways she had never anticipated. That was the moment she realized that hiding behind a mask of strength wasn't the true path to human connection. Showing her authentic, unfiltered self allowed others to reciprocate in ways she hadn't expected. Vulnerability, she learned, was the gateway to authenticity, and through authenticity, deeper connection was possible. When you think about your own life, do you sometimes wonder what could change if you took that same step she took? Can you remember a time when allowing yourself to be emotionally vulnerable was the key to making a deeper connection with someone? Or perhaps you've been the one holding back, afraid that revealing too much would push others away, wondering if it's all just too risky. Isn't that the paradox? We hide because we're afraid of being rejected, yet In hiding, we essentially reject any chance at something more genuine. And yes, it does feel scary at first. Emotional vulnerability isn't for the faint of heart. You risk rejection, you risk discomfort, but isn't it worth the shot if the payoff is a true, heartfelt connection? Isn't that why we're here, looking to establish something that isn't just superficial? Living is about more than just navigating the safe and comfortable zones, isn't it? Now let's ask a difficult question. What would your relationships look like if you allowed yourself to be emotionally open? What would it take to strip back the walls you've carefully constructed and let others in? True connection comes when you meet someone at their most authentic self, and when you allow yourself to do the same. So why not try it? Maybe, just maybe, the very thing you've been avoiding is the key to finally finding deeper bonds in your life. By engaging with people in a way that shows your true emotions, you offer them the space to do the same. Vulnerability can break down walls. It can create bridges of empathy and understanding. So here's your challenge. Let down your guard. Just a little. Show some vulnerability in your next interaction and see what unfolds. Will you be willing to embrace the discomfort and take that first step toward true connection? Maybe the real question is not about why you don't like being around people, but how much more you might enjoy their company once you're open to the truth of your own emotions. Number 6. Social pressures and masculinity. Sometimes we find ourselves retreating from social situations, avoiding people we used to call friends, or distancing ourselves from family. Is it simply introversion, or is something deeper at play? One of the often overlooked reasons for this tendency is the weight of social pressures, especially the unspoken expectations tied to masculinity. Over time, these societal ideals build a framework that can stifle genuine connection, turning what should be moments of joy and bonding into burdens. When a man feels pressure to constantly perform, be strong, and never show vulnerability, it's no wonder that social interactions begin to feel like a tiresome performance rather than a rewarding connection. A man once found himself at a crossroads in his friendships. He had always considered himself a strong, self-sufficient person. At work, his colleagues admired him for his unwavering confidence. At home, his family looked up to him as the rock, the protector. But despite being surrounded by people who respected him, something was missing. He couldn't shake the feeling that no one really knew him, not the true, raw version. Instead of sharing his struggles or vulnerabilities, he kept everything locked away. Conversations, in his view, were shallow and one-dimensional because they danced only around the surface: sports, politics, and trivial matters. What was even the point of continuing these interactions when they felt like forced exchanges? How many times have you found yourself playing the role, pretending everything is okay when inside you're screaming to be heard? He thought to himself. He thought back to his younger years when he felt the same societal pressure to conform. Not just at work or in social settings, but from the very day he was old enough to understand. Men don't cry. Men don't express weakness. Men have to be strong, steady, and in control. This concept of masculinity, this expectation of unshakable strength, wasn't something he consciously chose, but something he was conditioned to embody. It was the weight of these pressures, however subtle, that led to disconnection in his life. There were times he wanted to share his feelings, but he convinced himself it would make him seem soft, or worse, a failure in the eyes of others. So he didn't. Instead, he built walls around his emotions. But after years of self-imposed isolation, those walls didn't make him feel secure. They only made him feel more distant. The very pressure to live up to the masculine ideal that promised strength and self-sufficiency began to feel more like a prison. Isn't that the paradox? We push away the very connections that could nourish us because we're too focused on maintaining an image of perfection and control. At one point, a friend reached out, noticing the change. "Man, you okay? You're a little quieter lately," his friend said. At that moment, he felt the urge to say something. But what would he say? How could he possibly admit that his self-imposed mask wasn't working anymore? For a brief moment, the thought crossed his mind that maybe, just maybe, being a little less guarded would give him the chance for something more meaningful. But no, he couldn't risk it. Instead, he just nodded, smiling as he usually did. "I'm fine," he said. A three-letter answer that allowed him to play the role of the strong man everyone expected. It's a universal struggle, isn't it? The desire to be seen for who we are, yet the reluctance to drop the tough exterior we've worked so hard to build. We often ask ourselves, what would happen if we stopped playing the part? If we let our guard down for once, would the people around us still respect us, or would they see us as weak? Here's a question worth pondering. What is the cost of wearing that mask all the time? For him, it was a disconnection from everything real. Genuine relationships where vulnerability is shared and accepted started to feel foreign. Wasn't this supposed to be what life was about? Building connections that are based on something deeper than just going through the motions? Why do we avoid letting down our walls, even when we know that true relationships can only blossom from honest emotional exchanges? It's understandable, though. For men, the societal expectations around masculinity often tell us to suppress our vulnerabilities. But in reality, doing so only leads to a shallower experience of life. Those who want to connect with us, the real us, don't expect us to be infallible. They're seeking the genuine, unfiltered version of ourselves. Isn't that the irony? The very thing that makes us appear invincible, the stiff upper lip, the control, becomes the thing that keeps us from forming the meaningful relationships we crave. The truth is that societal pressures to maintain a facade of unyielding strength are not the way to foster true connection. The strongest relationships emerge when people can let their guard down and embrace vulnerability. Ironically, the more we accept our imperfections and share them with others, the stronger those bonds become. This isn't to say that men need to abandon their sense of strength entirely. It's about balance. Showing vulnerability doesn't mean forfeiting strength. Rather, it means recognizing that real strength is found in our willingness to be authentic and emotionally open. To hide away every flaw or fear under the guise of masculine idealism is to live inauthentically. It's about letting go of the image of perfection and embracing the humanness we all share. Isn't that when we truly see each other? What if, instead of fearing judgment, we allowed ourselves to experience relationships that are based not on who we think we are supposed to be, but on who we truly are? What if the old expectations of masculinity are the very thing we need to challenge in order to experience the life we truly want? It's a scary thought to consider letting down that mask, but the benefits could be life-changing. The real authentic connection lies just beyond that fear. Next time you find yourself thinking, "I don't like being around people," ask yourself, what expectations or pressures are keeping me locked into this idea of distance? Is it the people around me, or is it the persona I feel I need to maintain that's keeping me away? Perhaps it's time to start questioning those long-held beliefs and see how letting go could lead to something deeper, something truer. In today's video, we've explored some essential lessons on why you might find yourself withdrawing from social interactions and why being around others feels draining. As we've seen, societal pressures, especially the expectations tied to masculinity, can make it difficult to embrace the vulnerability needed for real, meaningful connections. These pressures build walls around us, preventing the authentic relationships we all long for. But recognizing this is the first step towards freedom. Throughout our discussion, we've learned that true connection comes from breaking down these walls. By being real, by showing up as who we truly are, not the version society expects us to be, we can experience a sense of belonging that's far more rewarding than playing a part. When you embrace this change, you'll find your social interactions transformed, moving from shallow exchanges to deep, authentic bonds. So, I encourage you to reflect on the ways these old expectations may be holding you back in your own life. Could your reluctance to be around people be the result of trying to uphold an image rather than being yourself? I'd love to hear your thoughts and personal journeys on this. Have you experienced this struggle? How do you overcome the pressure to conform? Share your reflections in the comments below. And don't forget to like and subscribe to Stoic Narratives Official for more insights on living authentically. Keep questioning, keep growing.